Welcome to Dhamma Talk program, which is this is the first step that we have to issue in the June and also in the next months to come. So that's why today we are very happy to have the experienced Buddhist Westerners with us. Especially he has experience about spiritual, we call spiritual journey for long, so more than 40 years. So today we have to exchange our experience with the Upashaka Yasha. So that's why I would like him to say something or introduce himself with the audience. So please, Upashaka.
Sawadee Krap, thank you for having me as your guest.
Yeah.
Actually, my Buddhist experiences started 56 years ago when I had a vision of a Buddhist temple in a small little town in Northern California.
In Northern California.
Yes. And 4 years later, when I got my driver's license, I went back to the same place and had the same vision.
Oh.
But this time I drove up to the wall.
Yeah.
It was a wall with a stupa behind it.
Oh, stupa. At that time in the States, there was some stupa?
No, there wasn't.
No. Oh.
No. Well, I didn't find that out for 40 years.
Oh.
But it had a very stylized stupa behind the wall.
Oh, I see.
And when I went there when I was 16 years old, I drove up to the wall, and on the wall was a small plaque that said, "This is the oldest continuous Buddhist temple."
Yeah.
That's all it said. Personally, I was surprised to think that a temple in Sebastopol, California would be the oldest Buddhist temple in the United States or California.
Yeah.
I would think Los Angeles or San Francisco.
Yeah.
Well, 40 years later, I had an opportunity to go back to the same place. And I went with my friend, my school friend, Marcus Folk. And he was a member of that Sangha.
Yeah.
And he took me back and with him and his wife took me back to the same place.
Right.
And when we drove up, no wall, no stupa.
Oh.
Oh, I was so disappointed. We asked the sensei what happened to the wall and the stupa. And the sensei said, there never was a wall or a stupa. That was a very strange moment in my life.
At that time?
Yes, that was about 20 years ago.
Oh, about 20 years.
Now, I've helped Tibetans build stupas, and the style of stupa in Thailand is slightly different. And I went to Sri Lanka.
Yep, what's about that in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, a year ago, I went to Sri Lanka, and the second day I was in Sri Lanka, I saw the exact stupa that I saw in my vision when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
So it took 56 years for me to figure out what the sign actually meant. It was the oldest Buddhist temple ever anywhere. And it was in Sri Lanka, and it took me 56 years to find out.
Yeah.
Really pretty odd for a Westerner to have that kind of durability and endurance in visualization as a process.
Yeah. So that's your first experience about Buddhism?
That was my first experience, yes. In college, I was just graduating with degrees in physics and math, and my advisors asked me if I wanted to continue on to get a master's degree. And he asked me to present a master's thesis. And my master's thesis was, where do solutions to problems come from?
Interesting.
Well, for example, the Buddha looked for the solution to a problem in his kingdom, in his castle, and it wasn't there. And he looked for that in the 6 years of his sadhu practices.
Yeah.
And then he went another place.
Right.
And he had to go to another place in order to find the solution. to his problem. And so my question is, where do those solutions reside before we notice them?
Yep.
Is there a place for that?
Right.
Well, my professor went to this bookshelf right behind his desk and pulled out a book of letters by Albert Einstein.
Oh, Albert Einstein, the famous scientist.
The famous scientist. It turned out he wrote a letter, in a letter to one of his colleagues, almost exactly 50 years before I asked the question.
Right.
And his comment on where do solutions to problems come from, he said, it's not physics.
Not physics, but
it's metaphysics.
It's metaphysics.
I had to look up metaphysics at the time, by the way. I didn't know what metaphysics was.
Oh, at that, okay.
And then he suggested I study an esoteric tradition recommending Buddhism.
Esoteric Buddhism.
By the way, I had to look up esoteric at the time.
Oh,
So his recommendation that I study an esoteric Buddhist tradition. This was in 1970.
1970.
In 1969, about halfway through that year, a Tibetan Lama moved to Berkeley, California.
Right, at that time.
About 60 miles away. And I decided to go ahead and pursue my master's thesis among the recommendation of Albert Einstein, which I thought was a pretty good recommendation.
Right.
It turned out that Albert Einstein turned out to be absolutely correct in every way about his recommendation. And how inspiring that would be to a young person in 1970 exploring esoteric metaphysical domains and understanding that Einstein somehow had known about this 50 years before.
Right.
Truly an inspiring connection. I spent 10 years with the Tibetans.
Tibetan Lama.
Tibetan Lamas. And we traveled again all over the place. And I passed certain tests in relationship to their yogis.
The yogi or one who practice yoga or meditation?
Well, they, in the Mahayana tradition, explains their training in yogic terms.
Yeah.
You have Hatha Yoga, Ana Yoga, and Kriya Yoga.
Yeah, Kriya Yoga.
They're really they're chanting, visualizations, and sitting.
Sitting, I see.
And
devotion of some kind.
Well, there's sitting, standing, and walking.
Yep.
And then there's other postures to get you involved in those in a very dramatic way. The postures are very hard to do.
Yeah, for the beginner, very hard. Even Theravada tradition, like I myself, when I was a young novice, very difficult to practice meditation, especially sitting meditation for a long, maybe for hours, very hard. But if we pass through that, I think we can, accumulate our experience and we can do well in another step, understand more about the deeper phenomena, especially mental phenomena. I think that's a good experience, like you, to have this kind of experience.
Well, the first puja that I went to
was about puja.
Puja ceremony, Tibetan ceremony. I had to sit in a lotus posture. Well, of course, my legs weren't right at all, and I had to push my arms down, and I actually rolled off the pillow onto my side before I was able to stabilize myself in the posture.
I'm sorry. I heard that it's quite difficult for Westerners to practice sitting meditation to sit lotus position, right?
It's not a position that they're used to sitting in at all, not culturally or socially.
Not culture, right? That's
they don't bend that way.
Yeah. Don't sit that way. I see.
But eventually you do.
Eventually, yeah.
And
we get used to it.
You sit there long enough.
Little by little practice. Great. Well, so next, what about your experience more when you get more accumulate your experience?
Well, partly in the Mahayana